Hey, it's time for Glassof0J. I'm Adjo. Today we have quite the fright. A firm and CISO lied in plain sight. Or so the case to a jury be made by the SEC, their complaint bare laid. An industry shocked with fear and doubt, o'er their roles both in and out. Should we recoil from our careers, or listen closer with laughs and tears? No adieu or further waiting. This intro is too long abating. The script is writ. Prepare your mind to witness this OJ poured out in kind. Welcome to a spooky glass of OJ. Today we have some frightful news indeed. You might recall I did a video earlier this year covering the former CISO of Solarwinds and getting a Wells notice with regards to the Solarwinds breach that happened back in 2020. Well, similar to how I also covered the former CISO of Uber who was convicted of misprision of a felony, obstruction of a federal investigation, which was prosecuted by the FTC, we now have formal charges that have been brought up against Timothy Brown and Solarwinds. Timothy Brown being the former CISO of Solarwinds. And we all knew this was going to be interesting. Now we have 68 pages of a complaint against Solarwinds as well as the former CISO. And being 68 pages, there's a lot of details. There's facts, there's content to go over that we just simply do not have time to effectively cover in a glass of OJ. So I'm going to have to focus on some of the areas of interest in the case while ignoring others, most of which just involves on how the breach actually took place in the details, the play-by-play. There's over 200 paragraphs in this complaint, and I probably have about 20 or 25 paragraphs to show you with relation to the claims. So we're really just cutting or touching the tip of the iceberg here when it comes to this complaint with this glass. But I think it's going to be a concise recitation as well as an understanding of what the case is against the former CISO as well as Solarwinds. So the focus is really just on Timothy Brown. I'm just going to refer to him as Brown or the CISO, even though he's the former CISO at this point. And much of these allegations also involve Solarwinds, but a lot of them also involve Brown, quote unquote, aiding and abetting Solarwinds in their falsehoods or misstatements. But I really want to focus on the CISO role and responsibilities. I think it's what most of us are most interested about in this situation. I also want to try and concisely recite those core allegations that are in the complaint, provide you with examples of excerpts there that I consider interesting and may even be troubling if they're true. And just remember, this is a civil case. It is not a criminal one. Unlike the Uber CISO case, there's no jail time on the table for this. And all the presented facts and allegations by the SEC are just that, allegations. The SEC has a burden of proof, and Brown and Solarwinds have the right to remain innocent until found guilty by a jury. That being said, you might see some of the things I say and the way I talk about the facts presented by the SEC, I may make them more matter of fact. I may be assuming they're true. We're assuming they're true for the purpose of reading the case. We're not necessarily assuming them true in conclusion. We're just simply assuming, seeing them true. The other thing is just to let you know, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a paralegal. I have no legal training. I just watch a couple, lawyer YouTube channels. So none of this is legal advice. If you are a CISO, you're worried that if you've made false statements to the SEC, if you're worried about getting your own Wells notice or any of those types of things, this is not the video for you probably. You need to go talk to your lawyer. You need to go talk to your counsel. You can watch this for giggles, but this is not going to be something that helps you, I think, avoid legal troubles. This is not what this is about. This is about really me taking a look at this complaint and kind of doing some self-reflection on my career as well as just kind of the industry at large as to what this kind of means to us in terms of figuring out where we go in our careers and if anything needs to change. So, and what companies may want to change with their practices and disclosure and even prioritizing security risks. So, let's get into some of the meat of this. I'm going to tell you what Brown is facing. I'm going to give you a TLDR, so you can drop off the video if you want, I guess. But I'm going to go through and also give more detailed explanation as to what exactly the different claims are. And they come down to 4 categories, but there's going to be some details there that I go through and narrate with you to let you know what's going on in this. And it's not what the media, many people in the media, and it's not what a lot of your favorite folks on LinkedIn are probably saying. But what is Brown facing? So there are 10 counts, or maybe they're not probably the best way to say counts is probably not the best way. There are 10 claims, they say. And one of them has to do with a count of fraud to stockholders for monetary gain, essentially, meaning that you withheld information, you misinformed, or you defrauded stockholders in such a way that it provided monetary gain for you, and you intended it to provide monetary gain to you. There are 5 counts of aiding and abetting Solarwinds, alleged violations of security laws through false statements. So again, the CISO being the person who signs security statements with the SEC, the different K reports you have to make. You're doing that on behalf of Solarwinds if you're a CISO. So aiding and abetting the false statements. And then 1 count of insider trading. They do detail out at least $170,000 of potential insider trading activity. And that'll be interesting to look at as well. But the prayer for relief. So what is he going to face? So let's say Brown is convicted of all of these claims. What is the SEC looking to the jury and to the judge at the end of the day to provide for relief? What are they looking to the court to do? Number 1, they're looking for Brown to surrender all what they call ill-gotten gains through alleged insider trading. They want him to also pay statutory civil penalties. Also, they're looking to have Brown prohibited from acting as an officer or director of any issuer, and that's a way of saying any publicly traded company, essentially, someone who issues securities and has securities classified under Section 12 of the Exchange Act, or that's required to file reports under the same. Basically, no publicly traded companies, and I'm sure there's a handful of other classifications of companies that would fall under this. But I would imagine a lot of private equity companies, unless they're going to go IPO, probably would be barred from having this person as a CISO in their future or on the board of directors. Now, that's not prison. It certainly is not prison, but it's something that's going to follow a career for the rest of that person's life, and especially being the first. It's never fun to be the first anything, and this is the first time the SEC has gone beyond a charge that had immediate settlement. And usually when that happens is they give a Wells notice, they talk settlements, and they arrange a settlement, and what they do is they announce that they've filed charges, because you have to do that in order to settle. You do have to actually file charges, but it's with an immediate settlement agreement. That didn't happen here, and that's the first time that we've seen that happen. So it's definitely a first, and it's a first for a CISO facing this kind of consequence. But he's 59, so it's kind of up for speculation as to the length he might have in his career left. It also might be debatable as to how much the penalties, disgorgement of any gains from the alleged behavior would hurt him financially. Don't know his financial life. He may be set already and may just be like, this is, taking 10, 20, 30% of my wealth isn't going to actually hurt me. But who knows? He may be in a situation where this does, the penalties and everything would actually hurt him financially, to where, he'd have to really worry about retirement and worry about things. So, the penalties and the impact to this could be real, very real. And it's no light matter. It's something we should all look closely at. It's something we should look at with an open mind to examine our own careers and determine how we should react to even seeing such a complaint. So TLDR, what's this all about? What are we talking about here? Essentially, the SEC is claiming that Brown filed statements with the SEC on behalf of Solarwinds since 2018 through 2021, which greatly misled the SEC and investors as to the security posture of the company. And during their investigation into the 2020 breach, the SEC claims that they can establish 4 categories of consistent false statements and omissions, including compliance with NIST framework for evaluating cybersecurity practices, using a secure development lifecycle when creating software for customers, having strong password protection and maintaining good access controls, and, maintaining good access controls, number 4 there. They claim for each category that the CISO knew, or if he didn't know, he was neglectful or reckless in not knowing, that there were multiple vulnerabilities, weaknesses, deficiencies, and did not only leave these things out of filings, but at many points over the years gave statements indicating that they were not issues. So it's very much a true-false situation here. And he said things were true when they were definitely not true, is what the claim is. And was saying they had good controls in place when they didn't, allegedly. They also make claims that the misstatements and omissions were material. Now, if you're in this world of securities, you understand what material means. But if you don't, understand that really it has to do with money impact, essentially. Would it impact an investor decision ultimately, directly, right? So that is material impact. A data breach that causes a loss of, tens of millions of dollars to a company is material impact, right? So that literally affects your financial performance and therefore has a material impact. But even so, because of the security filings we have here, these are information that investors are expected to review and to consider, and it is assumed that any reasonable investor would take a look at the securities disclosures and essentially determine for themselves whether they wanted to keep investing, stop investing, short, change their investment strategy in some way. That is a material factor. Those are material statements. And just like a bad CFO, for instance, might omit financial hardships or indications that the company's financial health is not strong, rather stating the finances are actually really strong and really good. If a CISO is claiming that things are okay when they're not, that has an impact to investors. So the SEC claims the investors, if they were informed of these issues, were entitled to be known about, that they would have possibly considered their investment decisions. Essentially, cybersecurity posture can inflate a company's value if not properly disclosed. So very important. Cybersecurity is becoming more important in our world. Defense, utilities, even investment. It is becoming very important. And this case, very much, it's a very, very bold case, and the facts are very bad for both the CISO as well as SolarWinds. If they're true, this is really underscoring how important this is and how seriously the SEC takes this. But basically, let's go through each category then. Let's go through each category of these issues, and we're going to go into a bit more detail now. And something to keep in mind as we go along is that the SEC makes it clear early on in their claim or their complaint here that even just giving a statement that indicated at a minimum the collective effort of these risks and issues and incidents, especially in the light of the statement's positive portrayal of SolarWinds security practice, that would have been acceptable. And this is something at a minimum we would want to see disclosed, which has given me hints that if you want to avoid prison, in this case, there's no prison, but if you want to avoid, an SEC complaint being filed against you, if you want to avoid getting sued under the Security Exchange Act, then do your minimum. At least do your minimum. Again, talk to your lawyers, talk to your general counsel, and get good advice as to what those minimums should be. But do the minimum, and the minimum was not even done here, is what the claim is. So let's first go over the first complaint. The first complaint here is that they were claiming that they had compliance with NIST framework for evaluating cybersecurity practices. And, you're going to see off to the left or right here, I'm referencing, statements and excerpts that are within the actual complaint filed by the FCC. You can go down to the doobly-doo. It's 68 pages, 200 and some odd paragraphs long. You can read along with me, but you'll see the excerpts there, and there'll be paragraph numbers. You can just go down to those paragraph numbers, and then you can read before and after to get more context. There's a lot more that I'm not bringing in here. I'm only bringing in about 20 paragraphs, I think, throughout this entire video. But it's just a lot. There's more emails. There's more conversations with engineers and employees. There's more conversations with customers. There's more statements that were made publicly. So many things that I can't cover here. So go check it out for yourself. But these, I think, are at least the ones that really struck for me. So with this NIST framework, essentially the idea is that in their security statement, they have boilerplates that essentially say, we have these 4 practices, and one of them is the NIST framework. We follow this. We follow the NIST framework. And for a majority of controls, they simply did not have any program in place. For example, in 2019, and some of these timings will be important, in September 2019, an internal review of their NIST practices, an assessment showed that only 6% of the NIST controls were considered in place. The rest of them were either no program in place, which was 61% of the controls. So greater than half, nearly 2/3 of NIST, they're not even following at all, in part or anything. They're not even doing it. And then the remaining 106 fell into program practice may be in place, but it requires detailed review. Well, they did more review. And in January 2021, they found that only 40% of NIST 853 controls were met or partially met. Tells me they really didn't move the dial too much. 60% completely unmet. So maybe they strengthened some of those controls. Maybe they increased from 6% to 12 or 15% on the program in place, but that is not any kind of meaningful improvement. And what's more is they continue to make the same statement about their NIST and following it. And that's what they basically say is the material omission or misstatement here is claiming to follow the NIST framework without disclosing just how poorly the company was doing in following the framework was misleading and deprived investors of material information necessary to make the claim that SolarWinds followed the framework, not misleading. A reasonable investor would have wanted to know that the true state of SolarWinds cybersecurity practices left it far more vulnerable to a cyber attack than SolarWinds public statements conveyed, and that its cybersecurity practices could cause significant financial and reputational damage. And I see a lot of frameworks out there touted by companies. We have SOC 2. We follow NIST. We follow ISO. We have PCI. We do COBIT, high trust, on and on and on. FedRAMP, and every one of these requires constant assessment, meaningful planning to improve your status. I don't think anybody can expect a company to overnight improve on everything. Even within a year, it's really hard to make meaningful progress. A lot of times within your first year of having assessed your maturity in any framework, it takes you kind of that year to make plans and to start those plans. And it's not really till year 2 you're going to see any kind of improvement. And, you know, the thing is, though, is that you cannot make statements leaning on compliance with frameworks when you barely have any compliance to speak of. You're not even on the map and you say you're at the place. It's ridiculous. We're not even talking about being partially met in a handful of controls. You know, it's not like, oh, we were 80% in place, 50% in place even. You know, you simply cannot make these types of statements. It's simply beyond the pale if it's true. So the second claim is that despite SolarWinds claiming they use a secure development lifecycle when creating software for customers, they actually don't. And so they go on to explain for the court what an SDL is, but essentially they say in truth SolarWinds did not always develop software in a secure development lifecycle. For example, in January 2018, there was an engineering manager that bluntly admitted the security statement's SDL section was false. But rather than suggesting amending the statement to make it accurate, engineering manager explained that SolarWinds could continue to hide the falsity of these statements and work towards making them eventually true. I've gotten feedback that we don't do some of the things that are indicated in the security statement SDL section. I want to make sure that you all have an answer to this. There's simple responses. There is improvement needed to be able to meet the security expectations of a secure development lifecycle. We will be working with teams throughout 2018 to begin incorporating, again, begin incorporating the SDL into their development lifecycle. The email continued to describe a plan that begins with general SDL training and describe deploying SDL pilots and working to roll out the SDL to additional teams each quarter. A plan to begin taking steps to implement an SDL is a far cry from presently employing an SDL as represented in the security statement. And then additionally, the engineering manager being referenced here made a statement to multiple senior managers that SolarWinds would cover up the false security statement by attempting to start doing it publicly, claimed it as they had claimed it had already done, does not reflect a culture of honesty or effective controls regarding disclosure, cybersecurity, or other matters. Rather, it reflects a culture of recklessness, negligence, and Sienter. I don't know what that word means. Sienter? At SolarWinds. It is also evidence of a scheme to conceal the true state of SolarWinds cybersecurity practices from both its investors and customers. And that's the same engineering manager who basically said, here's our plan to cover it up. And oh, by the way, this represents a lot of dishonesty. So I don't know what that full message looks like because they don't have that in here, but it'd be very interesting to see what those statements look like. But the security statement remained false and misleading through the relevant period. So basically through 2018 through 2021, same statement, despite never changing that they didn't have an SDLC. Brown is claimed to have known about the fact that he gave a statement in 2018 that wasn't true, didn't amend, didn't change any of the relevant statements on any future statements. And they go on to say that because Orion is essentially the crown jewel of SolarWinds, I mean, it's the biggest product. Everyone knows SolarWinds Orion. It's probably like 40% or more of their business. It's a major part of SolarWinds. Any major failures to live up to its statements and not disclose or amend disclosures amounts to a material mistake or omission. And what's more is Brown can't claim he doesn't understand his role as CISO and the importance of an SDL because in September 2019, he gave an interview where he stressed the importance of a company protecting its crown jewels from a cybersecurity attack. He basically said, my broad-based mission is to basically eliminate anything that is material damage to my company. I know I can't eliminate everything, so that's the first rule. So what do I eliminate? What do I eliminate that would be materially damaging to my company? He understands how important this is. He understands his role. He's not just a people manager. He understands what he's doing by his own words. As discussed above, Orion was not the only software platform where there were failures. So we're not just talking one app. And essentially in a 2020 blog post, he basically tells people to try to inquire about how organizations develop their code. And he talks about a secure development lifecycle, a framework standard by US CERT, and that you should follow these practices because it increases the likelihood of producing secure products. So again, he understands the importance of an SDL, yet is knowingly making these statements that aren't true about his own code. Again, it's not about the breach. And we're going to talk about that a little more. Number three. The number three issue, claim at issue here, is they claimed they had strong password protection. And contrary to its security statement, Solarwinds did not enforce strong password requirements on all of its information systems, applications, and databases. Basically, there were passwords that were stored in plain text, not encrypted at rest. But a particular example here is that there was a shared database service account password that was used for multiple databases. It was a shared service account. But in their statements, they made claims that they use a unique account IDs. It's part of their policy. They use unique accounts. And they found, and basically, as part of a 2018 audit, the audit found systems where shared SQL legacy account login credentials were used. There was a FedRAMP assessment. Again, FedRAMP uses NIST a lot, so this also kind of gives us an update on some of those NIST issues. So a September 2019 email attached an internal FedRAMP security controls assessment conducted by Solarwinds, compliance employee against 300 plus controls in the NIST framework. And when you were breaking it down into the subcategories and you get into, looking into identification and authentication, 0 controls were rated in place, 7 were rated as maybe in place, and 20 controls had no program in place. Again, not following NIST at all, right? SolarWinds also used a quarterly risk review presentation that was compiled by Brown and others in the company information technology group. And they were highlighting this as a risk as found during a Sarbanes-Oxley, a SOX audit, where password requirements were not met. Again, during this entire time, even up through 2020, where that audit report was, none of the statements reflected any of this. None of the statements were updated. So Brown not only knew this, but made others aware of this. But the SEC holds that not making their statements reflect these issues, they made material misstatements and omissions. And 4, maintaining good access controls. They really go hand in hand. If you can't identify and authenticate people uniquely, you're probably not going to get very far in controlling access. They included a section regarding access controls in which Brown and SolarWinds claimed that SolarWinds implemented strong access control policies. They reference things such as need to know, least privilege, and making references to the fact that they have a limited set of default permissions to access company resources for each employee, such as their email, corporate intranet, and that employees are granted access through, a ticket-based system, essentially, where there's a manager approval, there's system owner approval, other executives, and it's all defined in their security guidelines. They sound great. These are exactly the kind of practices you want to have, and it's good security advice. But the reality is, between 2017 and 2020, as Brown and SolarWinds senior management knew, basically, SolarWinds routinely and pervasively granted employees unnecessary admin rights. And they go on to say, indeed, there is evidence that most employees had admin rights at times during the relevant period. What's more, Brown knew. They established that a senior InfoSec manager had prepared a March 2018 security project slide and warned that the concept of least privilege is not followed as a best practice, and described use of shared accounts through internal and external applications. FedRAMP also continued to show the truth of the matter. Basically, that same 2019 internal FedRAMP security controls assessment does have a category for access controls, and once again, only 2 rated in place out of 43 controls. So again, just seemingly non-existent access controls in place either. The VPN issues. There was VPN issues with this too. So not only do users have admin rights to their laptops, but when you log on to the VPN, you can do so essentially without any kind of client device integrity checks. They don't have any network data loss prevention tooling at all, so everything's all host-based, but they're not ensuring that only company-owned devices are allowed to connect to the VPN. So essentially, you could connect to the VPN, take a bunch of data, and no one would really know because they rely on that mitigating control of being on the endpoints. And they called it a vulnerability. They raised it multiple times. And even after multiple attempts by a security worker to raise this issue in 2018, one of them shared the issue with Brown. And it was again raised in 2020 by that same employee, an InfoSec manager who had previously forwarded a presentation where this vulnerability was discussed. He sent it to him again, noting that the recommendation did not get any traction when it was raised in 2018. And yet they went forward with their IPO in 2018 without any mitigation, compensating controls, nor disclosure, as you would have to do during the IPO process. And they also go on to say that the vulnerability identified by Network Engineer was not addressed, and instead the company went forward with its IPO. The risk of non-managed devices accessing corporate resources is well known in the security field, and the company failed to even put minimal, again, we're talking bare minimums here. They're talking about what should be minimal here. Minimal compensating controls in place once the vulnerability was identified. For example, company failed to make any effort to regularly detect or automatically alert the presence of non-managed devices and did not undertake an investigation during the relevant period to determine whether the vulnerability had been exploited. Basically just flat out ignoring those things. And of course, the SEC makes a case for the fact that these are material omissions and misstatements. But wait, there's more that we're not going to cover here. There's a couple more claims about Brown and Solarwinds making statements in podcasts, blogs, press releases, the fact that Brown and Solarwinds knew more of more deficiencies, on and on and on. They also go into great detail about how the Sunburst breach happened. They go through how the attacker got in, moved around, did the things that they did, and even go through step by step and talk about when did certain customers get breached, when did they inform Solarwinds. But there are a couple things I want to highlight through that, even though I'm not going to go through all the details, is that SolarWinds knew in May 2020 that the vulnerability existed and had been exploited in Orion in I believe it was a federal agency, and it was used to breach a customer. Another customer came forward to them in October 2020, like 5 months later, and was asked if they had seen this attack with any other customers. And this was a cybersecurity company that said, hey, have you been seeing this attack with any other customers? We're seeing what looks like a vulnerability in your platform. Like, this is coming from your Orion platform. And the InfoSec staff had multiple communications with that firm. And despite their knowledge of similarities between the attacks, on a telephone call on November 5th, personnel from cybersecurity firm asked if SolarWinds had ever seen Orion act as it had during the attack. In truth, as InfoSec employee, another one, and others at SolarWinds knew, Orion had acted the same way. And nonetheless, in accordance with senior InfoSec manager's guidance, InfoSec employee falsely informed cybersecurity firm B that they had not previously seen similar activity from the Orion platform. In contemporaneous instant messages sent during the telephone call with the customer, InfoSec employee F messaged his colleague, "Well, I just lied." Now, that's not Brown who said that, but it's one of his employees ultimately said, "Well, I just lied." Then, despite recognizing the similarities with the earlier incident, InfoSec employees falsely informed cybersecurity firm B that they believed the activity was linked to a different, known issue because cybersecurity firm B had not applied a previous patch. "Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't apply a previous patch. It's probably because of that." Despite we're seeing the similarities in the exact same type of, the exact same type of information. And you said, "I just lied." Writing it down. just document it. Document it for people. And again, in December 2020, a third customer notified SolarWinds of the attack. And I think this may actually have been Mandiant, but I don't know. It seems to match up with what we saw during the news reporting during December of 2020. But essentially, this was the firm that reverse engineered the Orion code, discovered the exact vulnerability, found the malicious code that was in Orion. And basically, the SEC is noting that Brown recognized that the code was also at play for the previous two customers as of December 13th. Then on December 14th, they filed a statement with the SEC. So now they're going to actually disclose something. They've got 3 customers that are aware of this, and now they've got to disclose something. They filed a statement with the SEC disclosing the Sunburst attack, but really downplayed the issue, saying the vulnerability could potentially allow an attacker to compromise the server Orion sits on. Now, let me ask you a question. There's a vulnerability in our code, and it could potentially allow an attacker to compromise the server Orion sits on. That is a gross misunderstanding of this. It's not a vulnerability. It's literally malicious code written into the application. It does allow, and in fact, it does cause backdoor. It does cause communication out to, command and control. It's a fact. It's not a theory. It's not theoretical, even though in science theory is really the highest form. It is factual, but in the colloquial use of the word theory, we're beyond hypotheticals. It's an act of an attack that's ongoing. So you can't just do that. You can't make statements like that. The SEC is saying you can't go and couch this in a whole bunch of words when you have 3 customers and you've known for months that this was an issue and that there's an ongoing attack. You can't couch it in those words and make those kinds of statements to the public and make those types of statements to investors. Like I said before, Brown possibly sold stock while materially omitting risks from statements amounting to insider trading. If you're keeping the facts to yourselves, if you're not telling people things they have a right to and should know, and then you're trading stock, you're basically trading stock on an inflated or just not accurate evaluation of your stock. It's MNPI that you're not divulging things to people that they should understand and know. It gives you a market advantage. And they're going to try to convince a jury that this amounted to insider trading to the gross amount of over $170,000 in 2020. But when it's all said and done, it's not about the breach. It's about the cover-up. As you see, there's cover-ups here, either by omission, by flat out just, we're saying the state of affairs is this way, when actually it's this way, a completely different way. And the receipts seem to be there. There's been assessments that have been made by not only Brown's auditors that he would bring in, but also by he himself to other management and other key players within SolarWinds, but then would go and sign statements that said other things that didn't match those statements. It didn't bring any of those things to light, even at a minimal basis, according to the SEC. So basically, this complaint is not like what most people on LinkedIn have been saying, what the media has been highlighting about this. There's a lot of folks who reacted to this and said, oh no, CISOs are going to jail. It's hard to be a CISO these days. It's not. Just don't lie to the SEC. That's probably going to put you in a really good position there. It's about how well or how not well they kept their investors informed before the breach, during the breach, and after the breach. These facts aren't small. These aren't nitpicks. These aren't petty claims. They are egregious attempts at not just painting a bad situation in a positive light, but outright lying, misleading, or leaving out material details they had a duty to disclose. It's not a matter of, oh, we have NIST and we've got 80% of it, and we said we had 85% of it. It's not a matter of, hey, we say we have good password policies, but we had that one account out there, and we took care of it, and we told you about it. It's nothing like that at all, right? We're not talking about little nitpicks. This is a system. This is a pattern. This is a multi-year pattern of behavior. This is not the high bar to jump over. The SEC is actually setting the bar low, and they're saying, "Hey, everybody, you just got to jump over this bar, and you're not going to have a problem, with us." And this person decided to go well above and out of their way to essentially get a notice and to get these charges. They, this is not even trying, really. But really, security, we've also got to remember that security is not a magic wand. You don't buy your way out of risks. You don't just magically spend more money in security and all of a sudden everything goes away. And you can't go from 6% compliance to 100% compliance in a year, 3 years even. You can't fundamentally transform an enterprise overnight. You can, however, honestly assess, disclose. You can express you have a plan in place with goals established, and following up on progress is a far better way to disclose than just to make boilerplate statements. Financial statements, you have quarterly expectations, you have projections, you have a statement of fact, whether you hit those projections and why you don't think you met those projections. What challenges did you face? What are you going to do to face those challenges and to turn those around? Those are the types of things we see all the time in SEC filings, and it applies to security as well. For reference, SolarWinds' annual revenue in 2020 was $1.02 billion. In 2022, it was $719 million. That is material. So, should you be worried? Much like in the Uber CISO conviction, no. Not unless you plan on making false statements. However, it is a great opportunity to review your role in the organization. If you're a CISO or someone who is signing off on, SEC 8Ks, the SEC is making it clear here they're going to hold those signatories accountable for those statements, especially when your role is recognized as the sole officer in charge of security, much like CFOs are held to account for their financial statements. CISOs are officers of the company, and other officers, directors, and the CEO rely on the CISO to make decisions, approve statements, and manage risks. If your company threatens you to not disclose to the SEC what you should, that's an opportunity to call a lawyer. See if it's better for you to resign. See if you should maybe inform anyway. It's your duty regardless. If you're going to make a disclosure, if you're going to sign your name to something, it needs to be truthful. And companies should see this as an opportunity to reevaluate how they view the CISO role. They should treat the role as a trusted advisor, to prioritize the issues they bring, and if they do not, understand that they will be registered and as an accepted risk, and that could be subject to disclosure if it rises to the level of materiality. And what's more, a SolarWinds statement on the matter is, again, much like their statement back in the Wells notice, absolutely perverse. They say the SEC's charges now risk the open information sharing across the industry that cybersecurity experts agree is needed for our collective security. They also risk disenfranchising earnest cybersecurity professionals across the country, taking these cyber warriors off the front lines. I worry these actions will stunt the growth of public-private partnerships and broader information sharing, making us all even more vulnerable to cyber attacks. It's disgusting to suggest that being held to account for not honestly sharing information you're required to share with investors would risk open information sharing across the industry. Let that sink in for a bit. Because we're being held to account for not openly sharing information, it's going to make it to where we don't want to openly share information. It's a weird circular reasoning here, and it shows a very odd and perverse incentive here, and I don't think represents good security minded culture there in Solarwinds. Their statement basically says, hey, we're going to work harder to conceal the truth in the future. That's essentially what that said. If these allegations are even 50% true, this will be a big win for security professionals if a conviction is handed down. There's another side to the story, as always. There are, I'm sure, a trove of files yet to be discovered that may be exculpatory, may show that they picked and cherry-picked and data mined all of these statements, all of these things, and, you know, aren't showing the full truth. It could be. But, you know, we're going to have to wait and find out. But, you know, keep that open mind. Again, these are allegations, and, you know, they have to prove not beyond a reasonable doubt. That's criminal court. They have to prove on the preponderance of the evidence. And what they've presented so far does look very, very concerning, to say the least. The only issue really here is that even though the SEC is trying to show it has teeth, the only reason it's able to take a bite here is because there was a massive breach that gained their attention that they were able to investigate. Only other way they'd be able to discover these issues is through whistleblowers, which this complaint may end up encouraging. And keep in mind also, we haven't even talked about the new SEC rules for cyber disclosures, which go into effect this December. But guidelines from 2011 on SEC's website actually do indicate they already expect that people should be reporting, even though they're not explicitly, you know, laid out and required what you're supposed to report specifically. It still amounts to material cyber risks are needed to be reported in those 8Ks and in other statements. And the SEC is making the case here that these facts under the current rules, not the new rules, amount to withholding of material cyber risks from investors. And that's going to be for a jury, a court to decide if it gets to court. So what are your thoughts? Are you scared about this? Do you think the SEC's case looks solid? Are they making mountains out of sand grains? Are they nitpicking certain things? Are there items within the complaint you're actually worried about? Are they making too much of certain statements that may be made more in jest or made more exaggeratively by the security team or other technical teams on the inside? Is this making you change anything with the way you operate in your organization or how you're planning your career? Well, let me know in the comments, find me on social media, and I'll see you in the next one.